The Arctic wind howled across the deck of the Mikhail Rudnitsky, biting through Captain Dmitry Volkov's heavy coat as he stared into the black waters below. The rescue ship cut through the choppy waves, its floodlights casting an eerie glow over the desolate expanse of the Barents Sea. Beneath them, hidden in the crushing darkness, lay the wreck of the Kursk, a tomb of steel and silence. Dmitry's gloved hands tightened around the railing. He could still hear the frantic radio calls from that day, the desperate pleas for help that had gone unanswered. The weight of those voices pressed against his chest, heavier than the ocean pressing down on the ruined submarine. "Captain," a voice called from behind him. Dmitry turned to see Lieutenant Anton Petrov, his face pale under the harsh deck lights. "Sonar's picking up something." Dmitry frowned. "Debris? Maybe." Anton hesitated. "But it's rhythmic, almost like tapping." A chill ran down Dmitry's spine. He followed Anton into the cramped sonar room, where the operator, a young woman with shadows under her eyes, pointed to the screen. A faint, irregular pattern pulsed in the static. Tap, 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 tap. The room fell silent. "Could be shifting metal," Anton muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Dmitry exhaled slowly, or currents knocking loose wreckage. The operator glanced up. "Sir, if there's even a chance." "There isn't." Dmitry's voice was firm, but his stomach twisted. He knew the numbers, the crushing pressure, the time elapsed. No one could have survived. Yet as he stepped back onto the deck, the wind carrying the salt and the cold, the sound lingered in his mind. Tap. Tap, tap. Tap. Like a fist against a coffin lid. The radio room of the Mikhail Rudnitsky was a cramped, dimly lit space. Its walls lined with humming equipment that cast flickering green reflections across Pavel Orlov's tired face. The static hissed through his headphones, a constant white noise that had become the soundtrack of his nights. He adjusted the dials absently, his fingers numb from the cold seeping through the ship's aging hull. Then, a flicker. Pavel stiffened. Beneath the static, something moved. A whisper, barely audible, threading through the noise like a ghost. He leaned forward, turning the volume knob with deliberate care. Pomogit nam. The words were faint, broken, but unmistakable. "Help us. Men." Pavel's breath caught. He strained to hear more, but the static swallowed the voice again. His heartbeat thudded against his ribs as he adjusted the frequency, chasing the signal. "Anything." Lieutenant Anton leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Pavel yanked off his headphones. "I heard something. Russian. Someone saying Pomogit nam." Anton's brow furrowed. Interference. Could be a fishing boat. Or it wasn't a fishing boat. Pavel's voice was sharper than he intended. It was clear. "He did." Anton sighed, rubbing his temple. "Pavel, we're in the middle of nowhere. The Kursk's been down there for years. No one's alive to be calling for help." Pavel opened his mouth to argue, but the lieutenant was already turning away. "Get some rest. Your shift's over." The door clicked shut, leaving Pavel alone with the static. He hesitated, then slipped the headphones back on, his fingers trembling as he fine-tuned the dials. Silence. Yichel. Then. Tut kitio to yest. Someone's here. The whisper slithered into his ear, sending a jolt down his spine. Pavel's hand shot to the transmitter, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Hello? Who is this?" No answer. Only the static, thick and mocking. Pavel stared at the radio, the words echoing in his skull. Someone's here. But that was impossible. Wasn't it? Pavel's fingers hovered over the recorder's playback button, his breath shallow. The radio room felt colder now, the hum of the equipment like the murmur of unseen watchers. He had captured the whisper's 3 distinct fragments on an old magnetic tape, each replay making his skin prickle. He needed a second opinion, someone who knew. Captain Volkov's cabin door was ajar when Pavel arrived. Inside, Dmitri sat hunched over a faded photograph, his face etched with shadows. He didn't look up as Pavel knocked. "Sir," Pavel began, voice unsteady. "I recorded something on the radio." "Meh." Dmitri's gaze flicked to him, weary. "More static?" "More static." "No." Pavel stepped forward, pressing the recorder onto the desk. "Voices. Meant." The captain exhaled through his nose but reached for the device. His thumb pressed play. Static hissed, then. "Dot pomogit nam." Dmitri's hand froze. "Dot tut ktot jest." The third whisper was clearer, deeper. A man's voice, strained. The captain's face drained of color. The recorder clattered onto the desk as he recoiled. Pavel's throat tightened. "You recognize it?" Dmitri's voice was a blade of ice. "That's Mikhail Sokolov." His fingers curled into fists. He was on the Kursk. "My friend." The silence between them thickened. Pavel swallowed. "Then how?" "It's not him." Dmitri stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "It's impossible. The wreck's been sealed for years. No oxygen, no." His voice cracked. "No bodies left to speak." Pavel hesitated. "Should we report it?" The captain's laugh was hollow. "To who?" "Command will say it's interference. Or worse, hallucinations." His eyes locked onto Pavel's. "But you heard it too." A knock at the door. Lieutenant Anton peered in, frowning at the tension. "Captain, we've got a problem. The sonar is picking up movement near the wreck. Not debris, something big." Dmitri's jaw clenched. "How big?" Anton's Adam's apple bobbed. "Like a shadow." The recorder's tape spun silently between them, the whispers coiled in its grooves. Pavel's hands were clammy. "What do we do?" Dmitri grabbed his coat, his voice low. "We find out what's down there." The corridors of the Mikhail Rudnitsky were narrow and dim, the flickering overhead lights casting long, wavering shadows. Junior sailor Alexei Kovalenko hurried through them, his breath fogging in the cold air. He shouldn't have stayed so late in the mess hall. Now he had to navigate the ship's labyrinthine passages alone. A draft whispered past him, raising the hairs on his neck. He quickened his pace, his boots thudding softly against the metal grating. Then, a figure. Alexei froze. At the far end of the corridor, where the light barely reached, a man stood motionless. His silhouette was blurred, as if seen through water, his uniform dark and clinging to his body like a second skin. Drips fell from his sleeves, splattering silently onto the floor. Alexei's pulse roared in his ears. "Hello?" The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it tilted its head. Alexei stumbled back, his shoulders slamming into the bulkhead. He blinked, and the figure was gone. The corridor was empty, save for the faint sound of dripping water. His hands shook as he fumbled for his radio. "B-Bridge, this is Kovalenko. I just saw someone in the lower deck corridor. No one's supposed to be down here." Lieutenant Anton's voice crackled back, laced with skepticism. Alexei, check again. Probably just fatigue. No, I saw him. He was Alexei swallowed hard, staring at the wet footprints glistening on the floor. They led nowhere. He was soaking wet. A pause. Then Anton sighed. Fine, I'll send someone to check. Alexei didn't wait. He bolted for the nearest stairwell, his heart hammering. Captain Volkov was reviewing the sonar logs when Anton entered the bridge, his expression tight. Captain, we've got a situation. Junior sailor reported a figure in the lower decks. Dimitri's pen stilled. A stowaway? Anton hesitated. He said it was wet, like it had just come out of the sea. The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Dimitri set down the pen. Show me. The lower corridor was empty when they arrived, the air thick with the scent of salt and rust. But the floor was damp, not pooled water, but scattered droplets, as if someone had walked through in dripping clothes. Dimitri crouched, running his fingers over the moisture. Cold. Too cold. Could be a leak, Anton muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Dimitri straightened, his gaze tracing the droplets. They led to a dead-end bulkhead and stopped. A chill prickled his spine. Then, from the shadows beyond the flickering light, a whisper. TZDs. Where? You're here. Dimitri spun. The corridor was empty. Anton's face had gone pale. You heard that? Dimitri didn't answer. His eyes locked onto the bulkhead, the same one that separated them from the sea outside, from the wreck below. The radio on Anton's belt crackled. Pavel's voice, urgent. Captain. The recorder is playing back on its own, a burst of static. Then, clear as a knife through ice. Volkov. My zhd on Tebia. We're waiting for you. The corridor lights flickered once, twice, and went out. In the darkness, the dripping grew louder. The sonar room of the Mikhail Rudnitsky was a tense, claustrophobic space, its screens casting jagged blue light across the faces of the crew. Captain Volkov stood behind the operator, his arms crossed, his gaze locked onto the display. The wreck of the Kursk lay sprawled across the screen like a broken carcass, except for the anomaly pulsing at its edge. A shadow. Not debris, not a school of fish. Something solid, moving in slow, deliberate arcs. Lieutenant Anton exhaled sharply. Could be a current dragging wreckage. The sonar operator, a wiry man named Eerie, shook his head. No, sir. Currents don't move like that. This is, he hesitated. It's circling. Dimitri's jaw tightened. How big? Eerie zoomed in. The shadow resolved into a blurred mass, roughly the size of a human. Hard to tell. It's irregular, but it's staying close to the wreck. A chill settled over the room. Pavel, standing near the door, spoke quietly, the radio transmission. The whispers. Now this. It's not coincidence. Anton shot him a glare. We don't know what it is. We know it shouldn't be there, Dimitri said. His voice was low, controlled, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. And we know it's not natural. A heavy silence followed. The crew exchanged glances, none willing to voice the thought hanging in the air. Something is down there. And it's alive. Dimitri straightened. Prep the dive team. Anton's head snapped up. Sir? We're going to take a closer look. That's insane, Anton hissed, stepping closer. Even if we had the equipment for a deep dive, which we don't, there's no telling what that thing is. It could be dangerous. Dimitri's eyes were flint. And if it's a survivor? After years, you know that's impossible. The captain didn't flinch. Then we'll confirm it's nothing and leave. Pavel cleared his throat. What if it's not nothing? Nothing. The hum of the sonar filled the silence. On the screen, the shadow pulsed, drifting closer to the wreck. Dmitri turned back to the display, his reflection fractured across the glass. Then we find out what it wants. Anton's voice was strained. And if it's hostile? Dmitri didn't answer. The shadow on the sonar shifted again. This time it turned as if sensing their gaze. Yuri recoiled. Boshe moi. The shadow lunged. Not toward the surface. Not toward the ship. Into the wreck. The sonar flared as the signal vanished into the Kursk's shattered hull. The crew stared, breathless, at the empty screen. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sonar pinged again. A new signal from inside the submarine. Dmitri's hands clenched. That's it, we're going down. Anton grabbed his arm. Captain, think. We don't have the gear, the time, I am thinking. Dmitri wrenched free, his voice a snarl. That's my crew down there. My friends, and if there's even a chance. The ship's intercom crackled to life. A panicked voice echoed through the halls. Captain to the lower decks. Now. Dmitri was already moving. The crew followed, their footsteps ringing through the metal corridors. The lower deck was chaos. Sailors clustered near the bulkhead, their faces pale. One pointed shakily at the floor. Water. Action. Not a leak. Not a spill. A trail of wet footprints leading out of the sealed storage room. Dmitri's blood ran cold. The storage room had no exterior access, no pipes, no reason to be wet. And yet the footprints were fresh, glistening under the flickering lights, leading toward the stairs, leading up. Anton's voice was a whisper. What the hell is on this ship? Dmitri drew his sidearm. Something that shouldn't be. The diving chamber of the Mikhail Rudnitsky was cramped and smelled of rust and brine. The overhead lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the assembled team as they checked their gear with practiced efficiency. Captain Volkov stood at the head of the group, his face unreadable in the dim light. Lieutenant Anton adjusted the straps of his dry suit, his breath fogging in the cold air. You sure about this, Captain? Even with the patched-together gear, we're pushing the limits. Dmitri didn't look up from the dive plan spread across the table. We don't have a choice. The sonar doesn't lie. Something moved into the wreck. Across the room, Yuri, the wiry sonar operator turned reluctant diver, muttered under his breath, yeah, and something left footprints on our ship. That's not exactly a welcoming committee. A nervous chuckle rippled through the team. Pavel, leaning against a bulkhead with his arms crossed, didn't join in. His fingers tapped restlessly against his elbow, his mind still replaying the whispers from the radio. Dmitri straightened, his voice cutting through the tension. Listen up. We descend in pairs, Anton and Yuri first, then me and Pavel. Standard comm checks every 2 minutes. If anything looks off, we abort. No heroics. His gaze swept over them, lingering on each face. The Kursk is a war grave. We treat it with respect. But if there's anything alive down there... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fear. Then Yuri forced a grin, slapping Anton's shoulder. Hey, at least if we die, we'll have great ghost stories, right? Anton rolled his eyes. Shut up and check your oxygen. The team fell into their final preparations, the clatter of gear and murmured instructions filling the chamber. Pavel drifted closer to Dmitri, his voice low. You really think we'll find answers down there? Dmitri's hand stilled on his harness. I think we're past the point of ignoring the questions. Pavel swallowed hard. And if it's not answers waiting for us? The captain met his gaze, his eyes dark. Then we deal with that too. A sharp knock at the door broke the moment. A junior sailor poked his head in, face pale. Captain, you need to see this. The sonar is picking up movement again, but it's different this time. Dmitri exchanged a glance with Anton before striding out of the chamber, the team close behind. The sonar room was eerily quiet, the crew clustered around the display. The wreck of the Kursk loomed on the screen, its shattered hull, a jagged silhouette, and there, pulsing at its edge, not one shadow. 3. Nai, moving in unison. Circling. Waiting. Yuri's voice was barely a whisper. They know we're coming. Dmitri's jaw tightened. Then let's not keep them. He turned on his heel, the crew following in grim silence. The dive was happening. And whatever was down there would be ready for them. The descent into the abyss was a slow, suffocating crawl. The floodlights of the Mikhail Rudnitsky faded above them, swallowed by the crushing darkness of the Barents Sea. Lieutenant Anton led the way, his breaths loud and rhythmic in his helmet's comms. Beside him, Yuri's movements were stiff, unnerved. 200 meters, Anton reported, his voice crackling through the headsets, pressure holding. Captain Volkov's voice cut in, steady. Copy. Maintain spacing. Pavel followed behind Dmitri, his pulse hammering in his ears. The water pressed in from all sides, a living weight, as if the ocean itself resented their intrusion. The beams of their headlamps sliced through the gloom, illuminating swirling sediment and the occasional darting fish. Then, the wreck. The Kursk loomed before them, its hull a jagged maw of twisted metal, half buried in the sea abyss. Time and pressure had warped its frame, but the scars of the explosion were still visible, a gaping wound near the bow. Jesus, Yuri whispered. Anton's light traced the wreck's outline. Stay sharp. Whatever we saw on sonar came this way. The team approached cautiously, their fins kicking up silt. The silence was absolute, save for the static hum of their comms. Then, knock. A single metallic impact, reverberating through the water. Pavel froze. Did you? Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from inside the wreck. Anton's light jerked toward the source's shattered porthole near the submarine's midsection. What the hell? Nah. Yuri backpedaled, his voice rising. That's not possible. There's no one. Then he screamed. Face. There's a face. Pavel's light snapped to the porthole. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing but blackness. Then, a pale shape pressed against the glass. A human face, bloated and waterlogged, its eyes milky and unblinking. Its lips parted, bubbles rising as if it were speaking. Anton's voice was a raw shout. Abort, abort mission. The team kicked upward in a frenzy, their lights swinging wildly. Pavel's chest burned as he fought the urge to hyperventilate, his mind screaming one thought. No one could survive down here. No one human. Men. Behind them, the knocking grew louder, frantic, now pounding against the hull like fists against a coffin lid. And as Pavel glanced back, one final time he saw it. The face in the porthole smiling. Then the darkness swallowed it whole. Ooh. Back on the Mikhail Rudnitsky, the divers collapsed onto the deck, gasping. Crewmen rushed to help peel off their gear, but Anton shoved them away, his hands shaking. It was them, he panted, staring at Dmitri with wild eyes. The crew. The Kursk's crew. Dmitri's face was stone. Impossible. Yuri retched over the railing. I saw it, Captain. It was looking right at me. Pavel said nothing. His gaze was locked on the water below, where the wreck lay hidden. Waiting. Dmitri grabbed Anton's shoulder, his voice low and urgent. Did it see you? Anton's breath hitched. I don't know. A long silence. Then Dmitri turned to the crew, his voice hollow. Seal the ship. No one goes near the water. Pavel finally spoke, his words barely audible. Too late, Captain. He pointed. Nowed. A trail of wet footprints led from the diving platform into the ship's corridors. Fresh. Made. Dripping. Chirin. And moving. The radio room was silent, except for the ever-present static, a white noise that had become the ship's uneasy heartbeat. Pavel sat hunched over the equipment, his fingers twitching over the dials, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The whispers from before had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the quiet of a held breath. Then, without warning, the static ripped apart. A voice. Nah. Clear. Unmistakable. We are still here. Pavel recoiled as if struck. The words weren't whispered, weren't broken, they were solid, spoken with deliberate, chilling clarity. His hands fumbled for the recorder, his pulse a drumbeat in his throat. The radio crackled again. You should not have come back. Pavel's breath hitched. The voice was male, deep, but wrong, like something trying to mimic human speech. He lunged for the comm switch, his voice ragged. Captain. The radio had speaking. Static hissed in response. Then, louder. Volkov. Pavel's blood turned to ice. The radio laughed. Not a human sound. Something wet and gurgling, bubbling up from the depths. Then silence. Man. The door slammed open. Captain Volkov stood in the threshold, his face ashen. Behind him, Lieutenant Anton and two armed crewmen crowded the corridor, their weapons drawn. What did it say? Dmitri demanded. Pavel swallowed hard. It knew your name. The captain's jaw tightened. He strode to the radio, his fingers hovering over the controls as if afraid it might bite. Play it back. Oh, whoop PL. Pavel rewound the tape. The voice filled the room again, its words dripping with something like amusement. We are still here. The crewmen exchanged glances, their grips tightening on their rifles. Anton's voice was a whisper. That's not interference. Dmitri's hand slammed down on the console, shut it down. Full communications blackout now. Pavel hesitated. But what if they... Now, Dmitri snarled. Pavel killed the power. The radio died with a final, resentful hiss. The room plunged into silence. Anton exhaled sharply. Captain, we can't just... Dmitri cut him off with a look. We are not talking to whatever that is. We are not listening to it. His gaze swept over them, sharp as a blade, and we are not letting it inside our heads. A heavy pause. Then Pavel spoke, his voice small. Then, what do we do? Dmitri turned toward the porthole, where the black water stretched beyond the glass. We wait. Outside, the waves lapped against the hull. Knock. The crew froze. Knock. Knock. Not from the radio. From the hull. When something was outside. Something was knocking back. The Mikhail Rudnitsky creaked softly in the darkness, the hum of its engines a distant, rhythmic pulse. Junior sailor Alexei Kovalenko shifted his weight against the cold metal railing of the upper deck, his breath fogging in the Arctic air. Night watch was always the worst, the isolation, the silence, the way the ship seemed to hold its breath. He checked his watch. 3:17, 2 more hours until shift change. A sound cut through the quiet. Footsteps. Man. Alexei stiffened. The deck behind him was empty, he just checked. Yet the sound was unmistakable, the slow, deliberate tread of boots on metal. "Hello," he called, his voice swallowed by the wind. No answer. The footsteps continued, moving toward the starboard corridor. Alexei's pulse quickened. He grabbed his flashlight and unclipped his radio. "Bridge, this is Kovalenko. I've got movement on the upper deck. No visual yet." Static. Then Lieutenant Anton's weary voice, probably just the wind. "Check it out, but don't get jumpy." Alexei swallowed hard and stepped forward. The beam of his flashlight cut a narrow path through the dark, revealing nothing but empty walkways and coiled ropes. Then, dripping. The sound was soft but persistent, like water leaking from a pipe. Except there were no pipes here. Alexei followed the noise, his boots echoing as he turned the corner into the starboard corridor. And froze. Manned. The floor was flooded. An inch of dark water stretched from wall to wall, rippling gently, as if disturbed by movement. But the corridor was empty. No leaks, no open hatches. Just water where there shouldn't be. Alexei's radio crackled. "Kovalenko? Report." "Major." He lifted it with numb fingers. There's water. The corridor's flooded." A pause. Then Anton's voice sharpened. "What? That's impossible. Check the bulkheads." Alexei took a hesitant step forward. The water lapped at his boots, icy even through the thick leather. His flashlight beam trembled as he swept it down the corridor and caught a flicker of movement at the far end. A shadow. Man. No. A figure. The same one he'd seen before, dripping wet, its uniform clinging to its body like seaweed. It stood motionless, its face obscured by the dark. Then it turned. Ding. Alexei's breath seized. The radio slipped from his fingers, splashing into the water. He stumbled back, his boots slipping on the wet metal. The figure didn't move, just watched. "Kovalenko?" "Alexei. Respond." Anton's voice was distant, muffled by the waterlogged radio. Alexei turned and ran. His shoulder slammed into the bulkhead as he rounded the corner, his lungs burning. He didn't look back. Couldn't. The sound of dripping followed him, growing louder, closer. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Alexei skidded to a halt, panting. The corridor behind him was dry. 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 No water. No footprints. Just his radio, lying untouched where he'd dropped it. He snatched it up, his hands shaking. Then, beneath the noise, a whisper. "Tiny wide dish. You won't leave. Mia." Alexei's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't Anton's. It was the voice from the radio. The voice that shouldn't exist. He sprinted for the bridge, his heart hammering against his ribs. The ship groaned around him, the sound too much like laughter. Behind him, the dripping started again, and this time it followed. The captain's quarters were a sanctuary of dim light and quiet, the hum of the ship's engines a distant murmur. Dmitry Volkov sat at his desk, the weight of the past days pressing against his temples like a vise. The whispers, the apparitions, the thing in the water, none of it made sense. And yet, here they were. He reached for the bottle of vodka in his drawer, the glass cool against his calloused fingers. The first sip burned, but the warmth was fleeting. Then his gaze fell on the drawer's back corner. A small, leather-bound logbook, its cover warped with age and moisture. Dmitry frowned. He didn't remember putting it there. He pulled it out, the leather sticking slightly to his skin, as if damp. The pages were yellowed, the edges curled. He flipped it open. And froze. Mad. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mikhail Sokolov. His friend. His dead friend. The first entry was dated the day after the Kursk sank. Dmitry's breath hitched. His fingers trembled as he traced the words, the ink slightly smudged, as if written underwater. Day 1. The hull is breached, but we are alive. For now. The water is rising, but something is keeping us here. We can't leave. We don't know why. Dmitry's pulse roared in his ears. This wasn't possible. The Kursk had imploded. There had been no survivors. He turned the page. Maish. Day 3. The others are changing. Their skin is pale, their eyes. Wrong. They say they hear something in the walls. Voice. It calls to them. I hear it too, but I won't answer. Not yet. Yet. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting jagged. Day 7. It's inside us. The water, the cold. It's part of us now. We don't need air. We don't need food. We just exist, and it's waiting for him, for Volkov. Dmitry recoiled, the logbook slipping from his grasp. It hit the floor with a wet slap. Pages splayed open. The last entry glared up at him, the ink dark, fresh. Day, he's here. We see his ship. We're coming. The door creaked open behind him. Dmitry spun, his hand flying to his sidearm. Pavel stood in the doorway, his face drawn. Captain, his eyes dropped to the logbook. What's that? What's that? Dmitry snatched it up, his voice rough. Nothing. Pavel's gaze lingered. It looks old. Is it? Is it from the Kursk? Dmitry's grip tightened. The pages felt slick, like seaweed. It's nothing, he repeated, sharper this time. Pavel hesitated, then nodded. Lieutenant Anton wants you on the bridge. The sonar's picking up movement again. Then. Dmitry shoved the logbook into his coat. Tell him I'm on my way. May. The moment Pavel left, Dmitry pulled out his lighter. The flame flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. He held it to the logbook's edge. The paper caught instantly, the fire devouring Mikhail's words, his voice, his existence. The pages curled inward, blackening, the ink bubbling like blood. Dmitry watched until the last ember died, until nothing remained but ash and the acrid scent of burning leather. He couldn't let the crew see, couldn't let them know. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. But as he stepped into the corridor, the ship's lights flickered. And from the depths below, a chorus of knocks echoed through the hull. Tap, 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 tap. Dimitri's jaw clenched. They were running out of time. The mess hall of the Mikhail Rudnitsky was usually a refuge, a place of warm food and louder voices, where the crew could shake off the Arctic chill. Tonight, it was a tomb of silence. Sailors huddled in tight groups, their whispers sharp and brittle. Some clutched mugs of untouched coffee. Others stared at the walls as if expecting them to bleed seawater. The air smelled of sweat and salt, the tang of fear thick enough to taste. Captain Volkov stood at the head of the room, his hands braced against the steel table. The crew's eyes flicked to him, desperate for answers he didn't have. Petty Officer Lena Morozova was the first to speak, her voice raw. I saw one, in the engine room, just standing there, dripping. Her fingers twisted around her sleeve. It looked at me. Dead. A murmur rippled through the room. I heard them too, muttered a deckhand, his knuckles white around his rifle, whispering in the pipes. Lieutenant Anton leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. Hallucinations. Fatigue. We've been at sea too long. Bullshit. Yuri slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. You saw the sonar. You saw the face in the porthole. That wasn't fatigue, that was real. The crew erupted, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear. Footprints leading nowhere. Radio said Volkov. They're here. Dimitri's fist hit the table with a crack. The room fell silent. Enough. His voice was low, dangerous. We are not children telling ghost stories. We are sailors. His gaze swept over them. Whatever is happening, panic will get us killed faster than any phantom. A beat of quiet. Then Pavel, hunched in the corner, spoke without looking up. They're not phantoms. You're non. Loya, Biha. Every head turned. Pavel's fingers traced the rim of his untouched mug, his voice hollow. They're the Kursk's crew, and they're not dead. He lifted his eyes to Dimitri's. Not the way we think. The captain's jaw tightened. He'd burned the logbook, but the words clung to him like tar. We're coming. Mayor. Before he could respond, the ship's intercom buzzed to life. A junior sailor's voice, thin with terror, echoed through the hall. Captain Bridge now. The water-its. The transmission cut to static. Dimitri was already moving, the crew scrambling after him. The corridors seemed to twist, the ship groaning around them like a living thing. They burst onto the bridge and froze. The windows were covered in water. Not rain. Not spray. A thick, creeping film of seawater, slithering up the glass from the outside, as if the ocean itself were climbing aboard. Beyond the murky distortion, shadows moved in the waves. Figures. Mass. Dozens of them. Numb, drifting just beneath the surface. Watching. Anton's hand fell to his sidearm. What do we do? Dimitri stepped forward, his reflection fractured in the waterlogged glass. One of the shadows lifted a hand, pressed its palm to the window. The crew recoiled. Dimitri didn't move. The shadow's fingers curled slowly, deliberately into a fist. Then knocked. The sound shuddered through the bridge, a death knell. Dimitri's voice was barely audible. We don't let them in. The tension on the bridge was a live wire, humming with barely restrained terror. The crew stood frozen, their breaths shallow, eyes locked on the water-streaked windows. The shadowy figures outside lingered just beyond the glass, their forms blurred but undeniably human, or what had once been human. Then, from the back of the room, a choked sob. Senior Seaman Grigory Markov shoved forward, his face twisted with rage and fear. He leveled a shaking finger at Captain Volkov. "This is your fault." Dmitri turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Stand down, Markov. Stand down." Grigory's voice cracked. "You brought us here. You knew something was wrong, but you kept us anchored over that fucking wreck." Spittle flew from his lips as he stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "They're here because of you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. Eyes darted between Dmitri and the windows, where the figures still waited, motionless. Lieutenant Anton moved between them, his voice sharp. "Grigory, shut your mouth before I shut it for you." Grigory ignored him, his wild gaze never leaving Dmitri. "You think I'm scared of you? Of any of you?" He let out a hysterical laugh. "Look outside. They're the ones we should be scared of. And they're here for him." Dmitri didn't flinch. "If you're done, we should leave." Grigory screamed, his voice raw. "Right now, before they get inside." A beat of silence. Then, from the corner, the ship's doctor, Irina Volkova, stepped forward with a syringe glinting in her hand. "Grigory," she said quietly, "you need to calm down." Grigory whirled on her. "Don't touch me." The crew tensed. Irina didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, she grabbed his arm and plunged the needle into his shoulder. Grigory gasped, his eyes widening. He staggered back, clawing at the injection site. You bitch's knees buckled. Two deckhands caught him before he hit the floor, his body already going limp. The bridge exhaled collectively, but the relief was short-lived. A new sound cut through the silence. Drip. 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 Water pooled beneath the sealed door, leading to the outer deck. Not leaking. Flowing inward. "What?" Pavel backed away, his voice a whisper. "They're trying to get in." Dmitri didn't hesitate. "Seal the bulkheads, now." "Get." The crew scrambled, slamming hatches shut, twisting valves to lock down the ship's compartments. Anton barked orders, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But the water kept coming. It seeped under doors, through vents, trickling down the walls in thin, persistent streams. The ship groaned, metal creaking under an unseen pressure. Then, a scream from the lower decks. The crew froze. Another scream, cut short. Silence. Nah. Dmitri grabbed a rifle from the nearest rack, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Anton, Pavel with me. The rest of you, hold this room." Pavel's throat worked. "Captain, if they're already inside, then we find them," Dmitri said, "and we end this." The trio moved into the corridor, weapons raised. The ship's lights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows. The air smelled of salt and something fouler like rotting seaweed. The first body lay sprawled near the stairwell. Junior sailor Alexei Kovalenko, his eyes wide and unseeing, his skin bloated and tinged blue. Water trickled from his parted lips. Anton swore softly. He drowned. On the ship. Dmitri crouched, pressing two fingers to Alexei's neck. No pulse. But the skin was cold, too cold, as if he'd been submerged for days. Like, Iwan eaten lots. Then Alexei's hand twitched. Pavel stumbled back with a choked cry. Alexei's head turned, his milky eyes fixing on Dmitri. His lips parted, water gushing out as he spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. "Volkov, my zhdom tebia. We're waiting for you." Dmitri raised the rifle and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the corridor, a sharp crack that left Dmitri's ears ringing. Alexei's body jerked with the impact, then slumped back, motionless. The water pooling beneath him stilled, dark and thick like oil. Pavel's breath came in ragged gasps. What the hell was that? Dmitri didn't answer. His grip on the rifle was white-knuckled, his gaze locked on Alexei's corpse. The boy's eyes remained open, the pupils dilated, as if still watching them. Anton exhaled sharply. "We need to move. Now. Now." The trio advanced down the corridor, their boots splashing through the shallow water that now coated the floor. The ship groaned around them, the metal creaking under unseen pressure. The lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to twitch at the edges of Dmitri's vision. Then, a whisper. "Ty Blisko. You're close." Dmitri froze. The voice wasn't from the radio. It wasn't from the walls. It was inside his head. Pavel grabbed his arm. "Captain?" Dmitri shook him off, his jaw clenched. "Keep moving." The water grew deeper as they descended, rising past their ankles, then their calves. It was cold unnaturally so, leaching the heat from their bodies with every step. The air thickened with the stench of brine and decay, the scent clinging to the back of Dmitri's throat. Then they reached the diving chamber. The hatch to the diving platform was open. Impossible. It had been sealed. Yet there it was gaping wide, the black water beyond lapping hungrily at the threshold. Anton's voice was a whisper. No one could have opened that from the outside. Dmitri stepped forward, his boots sinking into the water now flooding the chamber. They didn't. Pavel's breath hitched. Then who? A figure emerged from the shadows of the platform. Mikhail Sokolov. Or what had once been him. His uniform hung in tatters, his skin bloated and tinged blue, his eyes milky and unblinking. Water streamed from his sleeves, his hair, his parted lips. Yet he stood upright, his movements deliberate, as if something else wore his corpse like a suit. Dmitri's rifle trembled in his hands. Mikhail. The thing that had been Mikhail smiled, the expression cracking his waterlogged skin. He prishol. "Man, you came." He asked. Anton raised his weapon. "Stay back." Mikhail ignored him, his gaze fixed on Dmitri. "My djdyom tebia dolgo. We've waited so long." Dmitri's finger hovered over the trigger. "You're not Mikhail." The thing tilted its head, water sloshing in its throat. "Net. No, my chastebia. No, but we are part of you." Behind them, the water in the corridor surged, rising to their knees in an instant. Shapes moved within it, pale, grasping hands, faces half-formed in the murk. Pavel swore, stumbling back. "They're everywhere." Dmitri didn't lower the rifle. "What do you want?" Mikhail's smile widened, splitting his cheeks. "Prinadlejat. May. To belong." Then he turned and stepped off the platform into the water. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ship lurched, tilting violently to starboard. The water in the chamber surged, knocking Anton off his feet. Dmitri grabbed the bulkhead, his boots sliding on the flooded deck. Pavel screamed. Shaved. The water was pulling them. Not out. Grits. Ian. Toward the open hatch. May. Toward the waiting dark. Doa. Dmitri lunged for Pavel, catching his wrist just as the current yanked him toward the platform. The water roared in his ears, the cold biting deep into his bones. Anton surfaced, gasping, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick metal. We have to seal it. Dmitri tightened his grip on Pavel, his muscles burning. How? Mimim. Then he saw it. The emergency hatch lever just within reach. He stretched, his fingertips brushing the cold metal, as something grabbed his ankle. Dmitri looked down. A face stared up from the water. Alexei's. His lips parted in a silent scream as skeletal fingers dug into Dmitri's leg, dragging him under. The world plunged into blackness. The water filled his lungs. And the voices. So many voices. Whispered his name. Name. The water was a crushing fist, pressing Dmitri deeper into the abyss. His lungs burned, his vision blurred, but the hands dragging him down were relentless. Faces flickered in the dark, their hollow eyes gleaming like drowned stars. Tai Nasbrosil. You abandoned us. The voice was Mikhail's, but it echoed with a chorus of others, layered and warped as if spoken through a mouthful of seawater. Dmitri thrashed, his limbs heavy, his thoughts sluggish with cold. The wreck of the Kursk loomed below, its shattered hull a jagged maw. Then, impact. Metal groaned as Dmitri slammed onto the submarine's deck, the water suddenly gone. He gasped, rolling onto his hands and knees, salt water spewing from his lips. His vision swam, but the figures surrounding him were unmistakable. The crew, or what remained of them. Their uniforms hung in tatters, their skin bloated and tinged with rot. Water dripped from their hair, their sleeves, their gaping mouths. Their eyes milky, unblinking, locked onto him. Mikhail stepped forward, his boots leaving wet prints on the rusted steel. Pokhimu. B. Why? Dmitri staggered upright, his voice raw. I tried. No. Losh. Wash. Lie. Chul. The word tore through the wreck like a detonation. The crew surged closer, their movements jerky, unnatural. Dmitri stumbled back, his spine hitting the twisted remains of the conning tower. Mikhail's face twisted. Tai/Ol Nas. I molchal. Meh. You heard us, and you stayed silent. Dmitri's breath hitched. The radio calls. The pleas for help. The days of waiting for orders that never came. Guilt was a knife in his ribs. I begged command to send divers. He choked. They refused. Said it was too late. A tie. Mikhail's voice dropped to a whisper. Tai Mog Prinyat Rishanai. You could have decided. The wreck trembled. Rust flaked from the walls like shedding skin. The lights long dead flickered to life, casting a sickly glow over the crew's ruined faces. But Dmitri's knees buckled. I'm sorry. The word hung in the air, fragile as a bubble. The crew stilled. Then, slowly Mikhail reached out. His fingers brushed Dmitri's cheek cold, wet, but no longer clawing. Prosty. Forgive. Give. The lights dimmed. The wreck groaned, and Dmitri understood. They didn't want revenge. They wanted release. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. I should have come sooner. Mikhail's milky eyes held his. No tie Priscialsacus. But you came now. Allay. The wreck shuddered. The light pulsed once, twice, then winked out. In the darkness, the crew's whispers faded, their shapes dissolving like salt in water. Dmitri was alone. Then, a hand grabbed his shoulder. He spun, fists raised, and met Pavel's wild eyes. The younger man's lips moved, but the words were lost in the roar of water flooding back in. The Kursk was collapsing, and the sea wanted them out. Dmitri grabbed Pavel's wrist, kicking toward the surface as the wreck imploded behind them, metal screaming. Above, a sliver of light pierced the black. They swam. The Arctic air hit Dmitri like a slap as he breached the surface, gasping, his lungs raw. Pavel flailed beside him, coughing up seawater, his fingers clawing at the waves, as if they might still drag him under. The Mikhail Rudnitsky loomed above them, its floodlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Ropes slapped into the water. Shouts rang out from the deck. Hands reached down to haul them up, their grips desperate, their faces pale with shock. But Dmitri collapsed onto the deck, his body shuddering, his clothes heavy with freezing water. The crew crowded around him, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions he couldn't answer. Then silence. The crowd parted. Lieutenant Anton stood at the edge, his face ashen. His gaze flicked from Dmitri to the water and back again. Where's Grigory? Dmitri's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Anton's jaw clenched. And the others? The ones who his voice cracked. The ones who changed. Dmitri pushed himself upright, his legs trembling. The crew recoiled as water dripped from his sleeves, his hair pooling at his feet. Gone, he rasped. A murmur rippled through the crew. Pavel, still on his knees, stared at the deck, his hands shaking. Anton exhaled sharply. And the Kurska? Dmitri turned toward the railing. The wreck was invisible beneath the black water, but the weight of it pressed against his ribs, heavier than ever. At peace, he said quietly. The crew exchanged glances. No one spoke. The ship creaked around them, the wind howling across the deck like a mourner's wail. Then Dmitri straightened, his voice rough but firm, set a course for home. Anton hesitated. Captain, the mission is over. Dmitri's gaze didn't waver. We're leaving. The crew dispersed, their footsteps hollow against the metal deck. Only Pavel lingered, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice barely audible. Did we do the right thing? Dmitri watched the horizon, where the first hints of dawn bled into the sky. The whispers were gone. The knocking had stopped, but the guilt that would linger. We did what we could, he said at last. Pavel nodded, though his expression remained haunted. As the ship's engines rumbled to life, Dmitri turned away from the railing. The crew moved around him, their faces drawn, their movements sluggish. They knew something had changed, knew he had changed. But they wouldn't ask, and he wouldn't tell them. The Mikhail Rudnitsky cut through the waves, leaving the wreck and its ghost behind. Yet as Dmitri stepped into the shadows of the bridge, the ship's lights flickered. Just once. Nens. A silent farewell. The Mikhail Rudnitsky cut through the iron-gray waves of the Barents Sea, its hull groaning under the weight of the Arctic's relentless chill. The crew moved through their duties in silence, their faces hollow, their eyes darting to the waterline, as if expecting pale hands to breach the surface at any moment. Captain Dmitry Volkov stood at the stern, his hands braced against the railing, his gaze fixed on the churning wake behind them. The wreck was miles below now, buried in the dark, but its presence clung to him like the salt on his skin. Tap. Met. The sound was faint, almost lost in the wind. Dimitri's grip tightened. Tap, tap. Tap. His breath fogged in the air, his pulse a dull throb in his temples. He knew that rhythm, knew it like the echo of his own nightmares. Slowly, he turned his head. The deck was empty. But the railing beside him was wet, a single, glistening handprint pressed into the frost-crusted metal. Dmitri exhaled sharply, his voice a whisper. Mikhail. The wind howled in response, carrying the scent of brine and something deeper, something rotten. Behind him, footsteps. Lieutenant Anton approached, his face drawn. Captain, the crew spooked. They're saying. His gaze dropped to the handprint. His words died in his throat. Dmitri wiped the moisture away with his sleeve. Saying what? Anton swallowed hard. That we didn't leave them all behind. Dmitri didn't answer. The truth sat heavy in his chest, the whispers and the static, the footprints leading nowhere, the voices that had slithered into his skull. The Kursk's crew had been laid to rest. But something else had hitched a ride. Nah. Anton's radio crackled. Pavel's voice, strained, bled through the static. Bridge, you need to hear this. Dmitri was already moving. The radio room was a tomb of white noise when they arrived, the equipment humming with latent energy. Pavel sat hunched over the console, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the dials. It started 5 minutes ago, he muttered. Same frequency as before. Dmitri leaned in. Play it. Pavel hit a switch. Static hissed. Then, Ty Dumel, my Yukodim? You thought we were leaving? The voice was Mikhail's, but wrong. Deeper, hungrier. Datch. Dmitri's blood turned to ice. Pavel's hands shook as he rewound the tape. It gets worse. He played the next fragment. My vezem shituyo to domoy. We're bringing something home. The transmission cut off. Silence. May. Then, from the depths of the ship, knock, knock, knock. Anton's face paled. They're inside. Dmitri grabbed the radio, his voice a snarl. All hands secure the bulkheads. Now. The ship's alarms wailed to life, the crew scrambling like rats in a flooding hold. But as Dmitri stormed into the corridor, the lights flickered, and the walls bled seawater. It seeped from the joints, the vents, the very pores of the metal, pooling on the floor in inky black puddles. And in those puddles, shadows moved, watching, mad, waiting. Dmitri raised his sidearm, his finger hovering over the trigger. The Mikhail Rudnitsky was no longer their ship. It was a coffin. Men. And the dead had come to claim it. The ship's corridors had become a labyrinth of dread. Every shadow clung too long. Every drip of water sounded like a footstep. Pavel pressed his back against the bulkhead, his breath shallow, the recorder clutched in his white-knuckled grip. The last transmission still echoed in his skull. We're bringing something home. A metallic groan shuddered through the hull. Pavel flinched. Bio. Then voices. Not from the radio. From the walls. Wah. A susurrus of whispers, too faint to decipher, threading through the ship's bones like rot. Pavel edged toward the sound, his boots splashing through the thin film of water now coating the deck. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as he approached the crew quarters. The door was ajar. Pavel pushed it open. The room was empty bunks neatly made, personal effects untouched. But the air was thick with the stench of salt and decay, and the porthole. The porthole was black. Not from nightfall. Not from filth. From water. A solid, swirling mass pressed against the glass, as if the sea had risen to swallow them whole. Pavel stumbled back, his pulse roaring. The whispers crescendoed. Then cut off abruptly. Silence. Day. A wet click from the corner. Pavel turned. May. The recorder on Senior Seaman Grigory's bunk had switched on by itself. The reels spun lazily, the tape hissing. Then, clear as a knife through flesh. You cannot leave us. The voice was Grigory's. But Grigory was dead. Pavel's hands shook as he reached for the recorder. The moment his fingers brushed it, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain Volkov's voice, strained but steady. All hands prepare to dock. Murmansk is in sight. Relief flooded Pavel's chest. Land, safety. Dead. Then the recorder played its final message, Grigory's voice warping into something guttural, inhuman. Net begstva. No escape. Shape. The tape snapped. Manned. The porthole shattered. Black water surged into the room, knocking Pavel off his feet. He screamed, thrashing as the icy tide dragged him toward the breach. Then hands grabbed his arms, hauling him back. Anton and two deckhands pulled him into the corridor, slamming the door shut just as the water crashed against it. The metal buckled under the pressure, droplets spraying through the seams. Pavel gasped, his clothes soaked, his skin burning with cold. It's not just them. It's the sea. The sea won't let us. Anton yanked him upright. Move. We're docking in 10. The crew sprinted for the upper decks, the ship groaning around them like a dying beast. The lights flickered, the walls wept, but no one dared look back. Murmansk's harbor lights glimmered through the fog as the Mikhail Rudnitsky limped into port. The crew clustered at the railing, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. No cheers, no relief, only the quiet understanding that they'd brought something back with them. Something wrong. Nah. Dmitri stood apart, his gaze locked on the dock where officials waited unaware. The handprint on his sleeve had long since dried, but the weight of it remained. Pavel joined him, his voice barely audible. What do we tell them? Dmitri watched the fog curl over the water like grasping fingers. Nothing. But they wouldn't believe us. The captain turned, his eyes dark, and some secrets are better drowned. The gangway lowered. The crew hesitated. Then, from the depths of the ship, knock. Knock, knock. Dmitri didn't look back. He stepped onto the dock. And the Mikhail Rudnitsky exhaled behind him, its hull creaking with the tide. Waiting. Always waiting. Months had passed since the Mikhail Rudnitsky limped into port. The official reports called it a mechanical failure, a stressed hull, a compromised bulkhead. The whispers among the crew were buried beneath non-disclosure agreements and reassignments. Dmitri Volkov sat on the edge of a frozen lake, the toes of his boots brushing the ice. The air was sharp with winter, the kind of cold that numbed the skin and hollowed out the lungs. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath curl into the twilight. Discharge papers sat heavy in his coat pocket. Medical retirement, they called it. Stress-related instability. He knew the truth. They'd heard the whispers too. The lake stretched before him, a vast, unbroken mirror of black ice. Somewhere beneath it, fish moved in slow, unseen currents. Life persisted, even in the dark. Dmitri closed his eyes. Tap. Made D. His breath hitched. Gnaw. Tap tap. May. The sound was faint, muffled by the ice, but unmistakable. His hands curled into fists against his thighs. He didn't open his eyes. The wind sighed through the bare trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and something deeper, something salt-tinged. Tap. Noted T. Closer now. Dmitri exhaled. Na. Ya slishu tebia, he murmured. I hear you. E. The ice groaned. For a heartbeat, nothing. D. G. A final, shuddering knock. The sound echoed across the lake, fading into the gathering dark. Dmitri opened his eyes. The ice was unbroken. Empty. But the cold lingered, seeping into his bones, settling in the hollow of his chest. He stood, his joints stiff, his breath uneven. The lake offered no answers. The wind carried no voices. Only silence. And the weight of the dead. Dmitri turned his back on the water. Somewhere, far beneath the ice, something stirred. Waiting. Always waiting. The screen faded to black.